Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Turigno again with the very last page of your Geometry C semester exam review. And this page only has 2 questions on it, 44 and 45, so we have reached the end of the road here. Question 44 is asking you to take this statement, which says Jason wears jeans on Fridays, and write it as a conditional, and then write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive. Okay? Before we start with the conditional, I want to remind you that you cannot always keep the words in the same order that they are in the statement. You have to think, does Jason wearing jeans make it be Friday? Or does it being Friday make Jason wear jeans? I know those were confusing questions grammatically, but I want you to think about what comes first. Does it being Friday lead to Jason wearing jeans? Or does Jason wearing jeans make it be Friday? Logically, of course, we know that it being Friday would make Jason wear jeans because, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we could all just put on a pair of jeans and turn a Wednesday into a Friday? But we know that's not how it works. So this is actually our hypothesis, and this is our conclusion. And remember, P and Q are the letters we use to represent hypothesis and conclusion. So the original conditional is always if P, then Q. So for this, I would write, if it is Friday, again, starting with the hypothesis, if it is Friday, I'll start over a little lower. Then Jason wears jeans. That's the only real logical way to write this statement. If it is Friday, then Jason wears jeans. Okay? If it is Friday, then Jason wears jeans. Sorry, my handwriting is getting a little messy. I've been at this for a long time and it's awfully late, so sorry about that. Hopefully you can still read it okay. The converse is when you switch the order of the hypothesis and the conclusion. So it's Q, or if Q, then P. So this is sort of that ridiculous statement that we were talking about earlier. If Jason wears jeans, then it is Friday. Okay. Now we sort of talked about this already, but assuming this first statement is true, that if it is Friday, then Jason always wears jeans. Assuming that that's a true statement, what do you think about the converse? Is that necessarily true? Well, like I said, we talked about this already. Jason wearing jeans does not make it be Friday. So I would say this one might be true, but this one is probably false. Okay, the inverse is when you negate the hypothesis and conclusion. So you keep them in the same order, but you insert the word not, or a word that makes sense that's similar to not. So I'm still going to start with the P and end with the Q. If it is not Friday, then Jason does not wear jeans. And again, we don't necessarily know that either. That would mean that any day that is not Friday, Jason wouldn't wear jeans. And there's no information that tells us that. Jason could wear jeans on Tuesday. That's just not given to us in this problem. Okay. The contrapositive is when you sort of do both of these at the same time. You're going to negate and reverse. So I would say not Q implies not P. Whoops. So if Jason is not wearing jeans. Then it is not Friday. Okay, and I do want to point out that this question does not actually ask you to go through and figure out whether these are true or false, but I just sort of wanted to remind you of all of these rules. If we assume that this conditional is true, that Jason wears jeans every single Friday, then we do know for sure that if he's not wearing jeans, it can't be Friday, because he has to be wearing jeans on Fridays. The rule that we talked about when it came to these is that if this conditional is true, then the contrapositive has to be true. That's what's called being logically equivalent, okay? And the converse and the inverse are also logically equivalent. So if the converse is false, then the inverse is false, okay? So it's like these two go together and these two go together. That's really helpful because if you're trying to figure out the truth value of one of these statements that has a lot of nots in it, sometimes that can get very confusing. But if you can figure out whether or not the converse is true, you should automatically know whether or not the inverse is true because those two always match, just like the conditional and the contrapositive always match. By the way, if you run into a sentence where the conditional and the converse are true, that would mean that the inverse and the contrapositive are also true. So if everything is true, that's what's called a biconditional. And we talked about that earlier in the packet. That's where the statement works in both directions. So if P and then Q and if Q and then P both work, that's what's called a biconditional. This statement is not a biconditional because these two statements were not true when we talked through them. Okay, in question 45, jumping back down to the parallel angle stuff. I'm sorry, the parallel line stuff and the angle pairs that are formed by those parallel lines. We did a pop quiz like this, and most of you did very, very well. I can give you this diagram and just one angle measure, which I've given you up here, and ask you to find every single other angle measure, and you should be able to do so fairly easily. Remember we talked about that if I have this angle, that 3 other angles are going to be congruent to it. They're always in groups of 4. So if this is 36, first of all, I know that angle 6 would have to be 36 degrees because it's corresponding with that first one. Okay, so these two are corresponding. They're in the same position in relation to the lines. I also know that angle 3 is a vertical angle, so this one would have to be 36. And then I also know that angle 8 would have to be 36. And you can actually think about that one a lot of different ways. It's alternate exterior with this original angle. Okay, those two are alternate exteriors. It's also vertical with this angle 6 that we already found. And it's corresponding with angle 3. So all of those methods should show you that those angles are congruent. And again, notice that there's always a pattern here. It's always these two and these two that go together. And now we're going to talk about how to find the other pairs, these two and these two. I know that's probably hard to see with my fingers in the way. But we'll talk about how to find 2 and 4 and 5 and 7. Okay, lots of different ways you could think about this or lots of different ways to remember this. Doesn't matter which way you remember it as long as you do. If this angle is 36 degrees and this one's right next to it and they make a straight line, what should you know about them? Well, I know that a line has 180 degrees. So to find this angle, I can take that 36 and subtract from 180, and I come out with 144 degrees. And then I could follow the exact same pattern. I could say if this is 144, then this is 144 because it's vertical. This is 144 because it's corresponding. And this is 144 because it's alternate exterior with that original 144. We also talked about these two, since they're same side interior, being supplementary. So if you knew that was 36, you would still subtract from 180 to get that. We also talked about same side exterior, so you could have looked at these two and said, I know I have to subtract from 180. It doesn't matter how you remember it, but just remember that you're going to have 4 that all match the one that you're given, and then you'll have 4 more that you just have to subtract from 180 to get the measures of those. That does it. You've reached the end. If you are at the point where you can do these problems in your sleep, where you know them inside out and upside down and don't have to look back at your notes to answer the questions, then I would say you're in good shape for the exam. If you are still having to refer back or peek at the answers to know how to do these problems, I would definitely recommend you study some more. Okay? I'm available by email all this weekend, and Monday before your exam is the second exam you'll take in the day, but we will have an hour-and-a-half study session ahead of time. So any of those questions that you have, make sure you're ready to come in and ask them on Monday. Okay? Good luck and happy studying.